Welcome to the Newsmaker. Are you ready for some action in the snow? We are. The World Economic Forum annual meeting 2019 is kicking off in Davos tomorrow. As top global leaders from politics, business, civil society and academia are making their way to the snowy Swiss Alps, I am sitting down with Alois Zwinggi, member of the WEF's managing board, to discuss this year's agenda and why the stakes are high despite the absence of US President Donald Trump and French President Emmanuel Macron. Alois, thank you so much for your time. This year, the theme is Globalization 4.0, shaping a global architecture in the age of the fourth industrial revolution. Why are we still talking about the fourth industrial revolution?
Well, thanks for having me. Well, clearly the fourth industrial revolution has just started, so I think we're going to talk a long time still about this. And I think what concerns us this year particularly is how is the fourth industrial revolution actually having an impact on the current trends of globalization? Because the globalization as we have known it in the last 40 years clearly seems to have come to an end or is coming to an end. I think we have seen an unprecedented 40 years of global cooperation, and that is now clearly changing.
But we've had the theme of the fourth industrial revolution quite a long time ago already, and there are so many more pressing issues such as global warming and geopolitical tensions. So why again?
Well, last year we didn't have the fourth industrial revolution as a topic, but we felt that it's really important to put together the topic of how does the next phase of globalization look like with the topic of the fourth industrial revolution. And you mentioned a couple of challenges coming with it. You mentioned global warming, global change, climate change is a huge challenge that we have. I think also the geopolitical shifts that we're seeing, the move from a unipolar world, it used to be about 40 years ago, 50 years ago, a duopolar world, then a unipolar world, and now a multipolar world where actually the forces are still trying to figure out who leads, who follows. And we see a number of other challenges like inequality. I think the last phase of globalization has produced many winners, but it also has also produced now many losers. And I think we see that in some of the geopolitical local shifts that are happening.
And talking about globalization as well, what do you think will be the key message and mood in Davos this year? Because in 2017 we had Chinese President Xi Jinping calling for a multipolar world, and then last year the America First message by US President Donald Trump.
I think clearly we will try to offer a platform so that the different voices about what globalization means can actually come together. But we will also for sure provide vehicles, sessions, projects, initiatives where the different stakeholders of society, governments, civil society, businesses, academia can actually get together and work out ways of how the next phase of globalization should look like in a much more inclusive way also.
Talking about US President Donald Trump, he has pulled out of the WEF this time around because of the partial US government shutdown. Was this good or bad news for you?
I think we're always obviously interested to have representatives from G7, G20 countries on a head of state, head of government level. Now, we didn't have an American president visiting Davos for, was it 20 years? So I think it would be unusual to expect that every year the president of the US would show up.
French President Emmanuel Macron has also decided to be absent and not participate at the WEF this year. Who is going to be the megastar this time around?
The other 2,999 participants of the annual meeting.
That's a good answer, Alois. Fantastic. But do you think that somebody else could actually take his spot? Maybe it's going to be German Chancellor Angela Merkel's last dance.
It could be, but you could also see very unexpected voices emerge. And if we stick, let's say, to heads of state and heads of governments, I mean, we'll have the new president of Ethiopia in Davos, and I think if one follows the media, what he has achieved in a very short period of time has not happened in 20 years in that part of the world.
And the Brazilian president as well?
The Brazilian president is certainly a new voice. If I stick to Latin America, we'll have 6 Latin American heads of state in Davos. The Prime Minister of New Zealand will be in Davos. She had her baby just recently. She's also a young global leader of the World Economic Forum, and I think she could also provide us with a very interesting view on how she sees the challenges for politicians. But also we will have a handful of global shapers. These are young people between 20 and 30 years old who are actually co-chairs of the annual meeting together with the CEO of Microsoft, and they will certainly also provide the participants with a very different view on what you would maybe traditionally expect to happen in Davos.
It seems that the young voices, the young global leaders and the global shapers community is really reshaping the agenda and getting a bigger voice.
Well, this is fundamental. I mean, if we assume, or if we look at half of the world's population is under the age of 27, how could we have an annual meeting without the voice of the youth present?
Still, you only have about 22% female participants. Why in 2019 still only a fifth of the participants are women?
Well, that's certainly something that doesn't make us happy. It is a reflection of the reality. And clearly in those areas where the World Economic Forum has the power to shape the invitation list, we clearly address that. So if we look at the young generation, if we also look at the open forum, for example, we make absolutely sure that we have an equal representation of gender.
Looking at the full program and agenda, it's going to be very diverse. Which is going to be your personal highlight? Because this is going to be your 9th World Economic Forum already?
Well, listen, when I go to Davos, I usually don't sort of mark what's going to be my favorite spot, because I think one of the beauties of the annual meeting is surprise, serendipity. You know, that you don't know actually what you will see, whom you will meet. And you might have heard this term, the famous Davos moment, you know, which is a moment that you would not have expected, but it happened. And so I don't have any expectations. So I really go there with open eyes and hope to get surprised. Now, I'm there to work, so I'm not there to enjoy myself, but I'm sure we're going to have some nice experiences.
I still hope you get to some receptions and some cocktails in the evenings after a long day of work. Now, there's not just the Davos moment, but also the Davos spirit. Now, with the economic slowdown and a lot of tensions and geopolitical issues, US-China trade war and so on, how grim do you think is the mood going to be like, or do people still go and party in the evenings?
Well, look, the annual meeting is actually a working meeting. So if I follow the daily routine of a CEO or of a minister or of another participant, there's actually very little time and energy left for partying. So I think what you allude to is something that happens more at the fringes of our ecosystem that has actually not much to do with what we do. So I think the mood hopefully will be one of facing the realities of today, not closing your eyes of what's really happening, however also not going into shell shock and not do anything, but actually mobilize energies to find ways to address these challenges. And I think one of the maybe lesser known facts of the annual meeting in Davos is that many projects and initiatives actually either get launched or get reviewed. Maybe just to name one or the other, last year we launched a global battery alliance, which sort of looks at the whole supply chain of the batteries that we use in our mobile devices, but also in electric cars, because as we know, the raw material for these batteries come from very fragile countries. And it's very important that we pay attention on how these supply chains work. And so that's something that got launched last year in Davos, and we're really eager to see how that worked out.
Let's talk business as well, Alois. Now, the last financial year from July 2017 to June 2018, the World Economic Forum had a budget of some 300 million Swiss franc. How do you see it develop in the current financial year?
Let me start by saying that we are a foundation. So we are not a business that responds to the expectations of shareholders. We actually, as a Swiss-based foundation, what we have to do is we have to satisfy the expectations of Switzerland, because that's the nature of a foundation. So I think in principle we do expect about the same numbers for the next year. Now, clearly the forum has grown historically, if we go back to the founding years, at an annual growth rate of 7%. That means that the forum doubled every 10 years. And next year will also be obviously a bit of a growth area. If I might highlight where this growth will be, we have last year opened, 2017, we have opened a Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution in San Francisco, and we do hope that this will also see further growth. We have last year launched a Center for Cybersecurity here in Geneva that is also picking up quite nicely. So I think we see a number of areas where the activities of the foundation will grow, so that our growth over the long term will continue.
And as you mentioned, the budget has grown exponentially as well over the last couple of years to around 300 million Swiss francs. So how do you actually make money?
Well, as I said, we don't have to make money, but if we rephrase that, how are you financed, then maybe what I would say is we are fully financed by member contributions. So about 1,000 companies are members at the World Economic Forum, and they can choose sort of how deep they want to be engaged with us, and so they choose different membership and partnership levels where they work more or less with us on specific projects. And so basically that's how we are financed, which means that all participants and all other representatives of government, civil society or academia or youth that are working with us are actually financed by the business side.
So you have about 1,200 member companies. Correct. And they pay about 45,000 Swiss francs to participate in the WEF annual meeting. How much does it cost this year? Okay, so let me answer that in the following way. There is no ticket that is being sold for the annual meeting, because as I said, we are a membership organization. So the participation in Davos is actually part of your membership. And the contribution that a company makes to the World Economic Forum, depending on its engagement, can range from 35,000 Swiss francs up to 600,000 Swiss francs. I think what's important also to note is that no company has a higher share than 0.5% of our total revenue, which means that this gives us a lot of independence, or that gives us maximum independence or no dependence on one single company or one cluster of companies. So that allows us to do really what we feel is right for the foundation. But you do have a lot of companies coming from the US, like Google and Facebook, for example, also more and more from China, like Huawei and Alibaba as well. Does it mean who is paying is also shaping the agenda? Clearly, we work very actively together with these partner companies. That doesn't mean shaping the agenda, doesn't mean that they tell us what we have to do. Who is setting the agenda at the end of the day? That is something that we do, clearly. Do you see more and more interest from Chinese companies as well? I know that, for example, Fosun, the Chinese conglomerate, is participating for the very first time, Chairman Guo Guangchang. How do you see that trend develop? Clearly, China is very strongly represented this year, and I think the presence of the Chinese president 2 years ago has given a strong impetus to Chinese companies. And this time around, we have the Vice President Wang Qishan as well joining. Correct. So, are they slowly filling the void that the US is leaving behind?
Well, the US is not leaving a void behind, but I think that Chinese is taking the right place. They need to play in our communities.
Security is obviously also always a very, very important point. Now, the canton of Graubünden usually pays about 2 million Swiss francs, Davos 1 million Swiss francs, the Confederation 3 million, and the WEF itself about 2 million as well. How will these costs be divided this time around?
Well, what you just referred to is an agreement that was reached last year, and it is valid from this year for the next 3 years. So the next 3 years, that's how the distribution of the cost will look like. And then the four partners sit together again and find out how is this going to be solved for the following years.
Let's talk about the gender representation at the WEF itself, something that still needs a little bit of work on, I believe. Now, on the managing board, for example, where you sit as well, you have 13 members, only 3 are women. At the board of trustees, out of 25 members, only 6 women. How are you hoping to change that?
Well, actually, I don't think we can say that we're hoping to change this. We're working on changing this. I mean, if you look back a few years on the managing board of the World Economic Forum, you would not have found a woman as a member of the board. Clearly, we are working very actively in creating talents internally, but also scouting talents externally. I think it's interesting to see that the current colleagues that are with me on the managing board, they're all colleagues that came from within the forum, so they're part of the internal talent pipeline. And that's something that's clearly on our radar. And that's something that we can do much better.
So can we expect any change in the managing board anytime soon?
I couldn't tell you that. The composition of the managing board is the responsibility of the board of trustees, but I know that it's a big topic for them.
Let's talk about sustainability as well, which is also a big topic. Now, it doesn't seem to feature as a very key theme on the agenda. Not so many sessions are dedicated to climate change. Why is that?
It's interesting. I have a different view on the program.
Tell me about it.
Because a couple of weeks back, I actually had a specific look on that. And just on Thursday, the 24th of January, I identified actually in the course of the day something like 6 sessions that have a environmental link. So I think it is a very important topic. Now, sometimes it might come in different shapes or form, but clearly, and you will see that also with the risk report that was published just last week, that the climate change will be one of the biggest drivers of risk going forward.
But you have a total of 350 sessions, so 6 sessions isn't very much.
No, that's only on that day. There's obviously many other sessions on other days.
Now, the WEF also released a report on meat consumption very recently, saying that eating less beef and more beans, for example, could cut death by 5 to 7%. Does this mean that we will see less meat on the menu, and what can we expect to eat there?
Yes, you will definitely see less meat on the menu. We have received last year an ISO certification for sustainable events, and this was not an accomplishment or a recognition. It was actually just the start of a very deliberate phase or a very deliberate strategy that we put in place to lower the ecological footprint at the annual meeting. And there are many different elements to look at, but clearly food is one of those. And I think whoever is in the conference center this year will take note that a lot of the food that is being offered will be vegetarian food. A lot of the food will also be locally produced because we do pay attention to this. We're also working with the hotels and restaurants locally and get great support for that initiative. So yes, you're right, you will see less meat.
And I can't wait because I'm vegetarian too, Alois. Let's talk about Switzerland because you're Swiss as well. What kind of role do you see Switzerland play? Is it increasing or decreasing?
If I look back over the last few years where I've been working at the World Economic Forum, clearly you can say that the role of Switzerland in the collaboration with the World Economic Forum has increased. Let's not forget that in the year 2015, during the annual meeting, we signed a so-called headquarter agreement with the then Federal Councillor Burkhalter. And I think that was an important signal for the relationship between the World Economic Forum and Switzerland. And we're actually very grateful that Switzerland plays this role as host and host country for the World Economic Forum and for the annual meeting. And we also work very closely with the different departments year in, year out to identify where are areas of collaboration where we can add value also to the interests of Switzerland.
Does this mean that you're going to keep the World Economic Forum annual meeting in Davos as well and your headquarters here? Because there has been constant rumors around this topic, right?
We're at home here in Colony where this conversation takes place. You have spent time today on the campus, and clearly who would want to walk away from here? This is a great place for us. Davos is a great location to have the annual meeting. It is close enough to an international airport. It is remote enough that when people are there, they're actually focused on what's there. The infrastructure of Davos is great. We have a great Congress Center. We have a good collaboration with most of the hotels. So accommodation clearly is key. So if the infrastructure continues to be like it is, we'd love to stay in Davos.
And you're also planning an expansion here in Colony in your headquarters by 2020. This is next year already, and add some 120 staff. Is this expansion on track?
This expansion is on track. We will clearly, as I mentioned before, as we grow, we need more capacity. We have 500 workspaces here in Colony, and we're in the process of expanding that.
Now, given the carbon footprint on Davos, would it not be wiser to avoid the environmental impact, to move the annual meeting elsewhere, to a bigger city where the infrastructure is in place, you have to pay less for security and the environment as well? I
think actually whenever you make an event of this nature, it doesn't matter where you go. You always have the same challenges when it comes to ecological footprint. I think that the challenge that we have as an organizer and that we will tackle as an organizer is how can we actively work in mitigating and reducing that. How are you hoping to set a bigger agenda when it comes to sustainability? Of course, for example, you have Sir David Attenborough as a Crystal Award winner. Are you hoping to give a bigger platform to activists and environmental, experts? I think maybe also a bit unnoticed over the last few years, but we've always had the CEO of Greenpeace in Davos for the last years, as far as I remember, the head of WWF, just to name two. So I think the NGOs that are active in the space of sustainability are very prominently represented in Davos, and yes, indeed, I see that this is an area where certainly our footprint will grow. In terms of global expansion, of course you have offices, as you mentioned, in San Francisco, in Beijing as well. Are you planning to set up any more offices around the world? We just opened in October an office in Mumbai, so that's very exciting. What about Africa? We are studying the possibilities where would be a good location in Africa. I could see on the very long horizon that we might have a presence in Latin America, a presence in Africa. Any hints in terms of countries? No, not at this stage. The big goal of the World Economic Forum is to improve the state of the world. How efficient are you in this goal? This is a tough question. Because many of the activities that we do, we launch that as a platform. We enable our platform so that different partners can actually act on it. And so many of the initiatives that you see quite successfully activated in the world have been launched at the World Economic Forum, but you wouldn't see our brand anywhere. Just to mention a few, the Global Alliance for Vaccination and Immunization, Gavi, here in Geneva, or the Global Fund here in Geneva. I think we are on very selective topics, clearly moving the needle. If I might give another example with regards to tropical forest, we have a very successful project to combat deforestation in the context of palm oil production. So I think in a number of specific areas, I think we can say that we have moved the needle.
It's basically planting the seeds, and then you hope that these flowers and trees will grow as well. Thank you so much for your time, Alois, and I wish you a very successful and interesting forum.
Thank you, Martina, and it has been really a pleasure to be here.